we're back. Another episode of You're Already Accepted, a community rewatch. Tonight, season 1, episodes 7 and 8. I'm Jonathan. That's Ethan. What's up, Ethan?
Hey, how's it going, Jonathan?
You know how it is. Oh, we're just hanging out, watching a little community. You know how it is.
Yeah, you know how
I'm excited, man. Yeah, well, I guess, of course, we'll get into it and talk about these episodes. But yeah, I'm feeling it. I'm feeling it tonight. So let's start off with intro to stats. Extra credit, the first scene with Chang. I guess I want to hear your comments on this, but it looks like he tries to put on his own tanning, like makeup or tanning kind of thing, and it just looks awful because in the shot, at least when I was watching it on Netflix, you could see the tan pretty clearly around his face, but around his eyes, it was not very well done and just kind of seemed uneven. And I was like, okay, that's either a mistake by like the makeup people or that's Chang making the mistake, and which is a lot funnier.
Yeah, I'd like to believe that it's just Chang. You know, it could just be him trying to get ready for his Halloween costume, going as a matador. But
That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Then the Mexican Halloween as a sex position, they use that as a joke, and how Abed looks back at Troy and Jeff, but like Jeff for a second, Troy does like not know what it is, and Jeff's kind of like maybe familiar, but probably not. But once Abed looks back, they're like, oh yeah, they're kind of nodding their head, and then there's this lady in the very back of the class. She she just has like her head down, kind of smiling, like, "Hey, been there."
yeah, I love like we get that. There's a couple other like times throughout the show. I don't remember specific examples, but there are times where Troy like pretends to know something that like he thinks that he should know, or like something that Jeff knows. Troy pretends to know it too, and I just love the acting and like those moments where like Troy hasn't really been around long enough to probably know what some of these things are, but he pretends like he knows what they are to be cool like Jeff.
Yeah, real subtle, and that kind of leads to like a larger question of, obviously we know the things we know about Troy's high school experience was that he was popular because he was a really good quarterback, a really good athlete, but it doesn't seem like he had this really really like experiential high school with like ladies and stuff like that. They just kind of talk about him as an athlete, which is, I don't know, maybe there's not much to like dig into there, but it's just kind of interesting that he didn't really have, or at least we don't really hear much about that kind of part of his high school experience. But again, maybe that was there.
He just doesn't kiss and tell, man, you know?
Yeah. Troy's respectful to the ladies, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then another little thing, there's a bit of a continuity error because in this episode we kind of get a little bit more of a snippet into Shirley's background with her husband and with her family, and they mention how Shirley isn't wearing her wedding ring anymore. But I just went back to this previous episode because obviously we're 7 episodes in, and I could go all the way back, but I'm like, I'm not doing that. But I just went back to episode 6 to see if she was wearing a wedding ring, and I double checked because when she lifts up her hand to show everybody in the class, she's lifting up her left hand, and when I went back, I was like, okay, there's nothing on the left hand, and I don't think there was anything on her right. So again, we've talked about this during this rewatch of season 1. They're still figuring it out. They're still pretty much writing these storylines kind of as they go, and it's a good place to go. And we'll talk about it later, kind of in our marked and read and our kind of final thoughts on this episode. But I don't mind what they do there and kind of where they go, but just a little continuity error.
Yeah, look at you, Detective Jonathan, going back to do the deep dives. No, but I didn't notice that, so that's interesting. That's probably just a continuity error. You know, there's something they didn't just think about. They probably didn't think anybody would go back and look at it that closely.
That's what this is. That's what that's what we're doing here.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah. What you got for
one of the things I noticed or I thought was kind of odd was in the opening scene where Pierce he's trying to get his phone to work and it calls his mother. And I don't remember ever, like, I don't know, maybe they mention his mom throughout the series, but like, I don't think we ever see her or hear from her again, if I remember right. So it's just kind of weird that like, this is like the one time I feel like we really get a sense of like who his mom is. And then we definitely see his dad later because there's like a couple episodes about him and like specifically like the video game episode. And we see him and we hear her say something about, I saw your father's ghost again. Like in this conversation, and it's like this opening scene, she says that to him on the phone when he's trying to like get out of the room. His father's obviously alive, so either his mom is crazy, which is what I want to believe, or again, another continuity error. They planned on his dad being dead and then later decided to have him come back and be alive for the episode. Something I noticed listening and watching this episode, great scene with Pierce and his phone. I feel like it's funny because I feel like Pierce was kind of ahead of his time with voice commands, trying to get phones to do things. I mean, at this time, phones could do stuff like that, but they weren't quite as like high tech as we have now with Siri. So I just I love the Pierce and his lack of technology, the boomer approach to technology that he has. And then another thing I noticed that I thought was, I don't know if this is something that is just, I need to watch less TV and movies or what, but there's a part with Pierce after he takes the pill from Starburns and he's in the library and they show him making these weird like mouth movements, like stuff like that. And like, there's a scene in Christmas Vacation where Chevy Chase does those like similar mouth movements. It's when they're eating the dinner with like the chicken or the turkey that's like obviously overbaked and they're all eating, like trying to pretend like it's good. And he does that kind of like same stuff. So just like something that I kind of almost like a callback. I don't know if that was intentional or just if Chevy Chase, I think he's just that good at the facial acting and like the expressions, because he has a lot of moments like that in this episode and some of the other ones were just the facial expressions he makes. It's kind of like physical comedy. I think he does a great job with it. It's kind of funny to see those things because it just adds some more character to Pierce and his weirdness. But I don't know, just maybe a little callback, something I noticed that made me think of earlier Chevy Chase in his younger days.
I bet it's a bit of a callback. And that's a good point too, because I feel like it's hard for us. I mean, you were born, what, 99? I was born 97?
98. Yeah.
98. I feel like it's hard for us to really understand like the gravity of Chevy Chase and like what he represented, how good he was when he was in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, it's no surprise that like we kind of based this off the rewatchables. And I was watching an episode of theirs on Fletch from 84, starring Chevy Chase, and you really hear about how people really revered him and just how people revered his talent. And kind of like as you pointed here, like you can kind of see it and you can see, oh, this is why this guy was so popular and was so big. And in certain ways, from what I know, if he was a little more of a let's face it, a better guy, kind of off screen, he'd probably be even a bigger star. No, but that's a good point. For A+ stuff, my favorite line in this episode, Jeff talking to Britta, and Chang chimes in, and Jeff goes, "Look, it's the eavesdropping matador." Chang saying, "Are you saying my people are sneaky?" And just getting really upset. And it's just so funny how, and they do it pretty consistently with Chang's character, just how much they point out like, or how Chang is offended to racism and or whatever. And it's kind of funny because I'm like, oh, is he offended as a fake Spanish person, or is he offended as a Chinese person? And like, it doesn't really matter, but it's just funny how he's just so offended out of nowhere.
Yeah, I almost kind of wonder, like with its Chang, it's hard to tell like if he's actually getting offended or if he's just messing with Jeff, and just trying to act like he's offended. It's hard to tell with Chang because we just don't know like what he's thinking and what he's doing. But either way, it makes for a funny conversation and good dialogue.
Next up, I feel like this character and this version of this character steals the episode for me. Batman Abed. I was thinking about this before we started. So his costume is kind of based more off the 90s or I think it's kind of a mixture, I feel like, between like Keaton and a little bit of Clooney, because I think his belt is maybe that second Keaton movie, but his cape kind of feels more like maybe the Val Kilmer or the George Clooney one. But his voice is definitely based off of the Christian Bale ones. And the funny thing about it, because I was thinking about this a lot, how really since Bale in 2005 kind of introduced the scruffy, like half raspy, like the secret Batman voice. That's been the Batman voice. I mean,
yeah.
Ben Affleck did a version of it. Robert just did a version of it. And it's kind of funny how, again, that was a scene from 13 years ago, this episode, but that voice still, oh, that's Batman. Like, and it doesn't feel like goofy. It doesn't feel out of place. And obviously they use it for jokes in this, but I think Batman Abed steals the show. And it's one of my favorite iterations of Abed. because we have, I mean, we'll see in the second paintball episode, you have like outlaw cowboy Abed. In the detective episode, you have the Commissioner Abed, where he's getting pissed and he got sciatica, and you just get different versions of him. But this is honestly one of my favorite versions of Abed, and one of my favorite one-off kind of characters in the show.
No, I agree, and I think I just love that Abed really plays into the characters that he's obviously being meta with and is trying to, parody TV and movies with. He really plays into him, and just I think I'm sure Danny Pudi had a lot of fun like doing these characters because he got to just kind of be funny, but like also like show off his acting skills. But in the show, in the universe of the show, like for Abed, for him, again, we've talked about this before. This is how he expresses himself. This is how he relates to life, is through TV and movies. And it's like Halloween is the perfect chance for him to dress up as one of his favorite characters, like, which we see him like do it anyway. He's obviously like later on in the show, like a big Inspector Spacetime fan. Like he dresses up anyway, but like early on, we're already seeing that Abed he loves dressing up as his characters. And it's just kind of like an innocent, again, Abed, he's just kind of an innocent character. You love him because he's kind of like a little kid, but at the same time, I think we all probably secretly envy him for getting to dress up as Batman, and like actually pulls it off pretty well. And he even gets to have the whole like brooding dialogue at the end, standing on top of the roof. So yeah, a great episode. I agree. Batman Abed, I think, steals the show.
And we talk about it every week with what's the deep line, or one of the deep lines when Jeff's like, "Are you staying for the party?" "You can stay. There can be no party." Like, oh my goodness,
it's so ridiculous. But like you think about it, like, man, that actually kind of works for a Batman line. Feels like it's straight out of the 1989 like Michael Keaton Batman. Honestly, like some of the dialogue for Abed, yeah, it could work as well. You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts. I mean, it works. I'd love to see Danny Pudi in a Batman film. Maybe it'd be a fun like cameo or something. But I had a lot of standouts for this episode. I think this is a really awesome episode. I don't think you were as big on it. We'll get to that a little later, but there's a lot of, I think, great lines and just some good scenes in this episode. It kind of feels like really the first real Community, like one of the first kind of like unique episodes to where like there's a theme, there's like all the characters together at once. There's really not like there are like B plots, but like they're all together. It's not like each character's having their own adventure. They're all kind of contained to the Halloween party. And there's just like some good classic like back and forth, fast-paced like conversations with some good one-liners. We get obviously, some good Chang lines, some good Chang moments. We get the Halloween costumes, which are always a hit when we have like them dressing up. Like there's this one, and then there's like the zombie episode, which is another great Halloween one. Obviously you mentioned the paintball ones and all, just when they get to dress up and like be crazy. Those are some of my favorite episodes. And this one, I think, hits that early on. It just feels like Community rewatching this. Yeah. I mean, the Jeff and Slater, the first time that we see them talking after her class and they're going back and forth, just kind of like rapid fire conversation. I feel like that is just a great scene of writing, of the dialogue and like the acting, between, Jeff and Slater. And I should have looked at, I don't know the name of the actress that plays Professor Slater. I need to look that up because she does a great job in this episode. I think she delivers her dialogue really well. I just think it's a good scene. You really get to see kind of a side of Jeff of like the desperate, guy who knows he's attractive, but like he kind of like meets his match here because she knows what she's into. Like she knows she's hot stuff as well. So she's not going to just give in right away to him. And kind of as like a nice little foil to like Jeff's passes on women. I just enjoy that scene a lot. I really like Annie trying to be formidable. The conversation between her and Jeff in the hallway is funny. There's some good lines in there. My favorite is when she's complaining, or she's talking about high school, and she says that she was so unpopular that the crossing guard would lure her into traffic. And that's such a dark line. I think that's something that Community does well, is like the lines that are kind of like dark when you think about them, they work because they're not super dark, but they're kind of like morbid when you think about them, but it's kind of funny too. I don't know. You just kind of feel bad for Annie because, she was not liked in high school. We kind of get that picture a lot here, but I think it's a great scene as well. Again, I think the back and forth between Joel McHale and Alison Brie in that scene is great. Like kind of similar to the Slater scene where they're kind of just going back and forth with one-liners. And I think the writing is good. I think the chemistry is great. Overall, I think this episode as a whole, like all the characters, the study group, you get Chang, you get Slater, they all have really good chemistry. And I think it works really well. I don't want to get ahead of myself with like later, but like I just like this episode a lot. I don't know. I just think the acting's great. I think the writing's good. I think there's good story. I love like we get to kind of see a glimpse of Chang and Jeff, like their relationship as well. We kind of start to see them like have a weird like friendship, like not friendship, to where, you know, I think the fact that Chang's a professor probably like makes it weird to like we see him give Jeff a ride to like the party, and he gives Jeff like the tip on how to ask Slater out. Kind of a friendship. It's kind of a bromance that we see blooming here. So I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of good moments in this episode. There's too many others I could name them all, but I don't want to rehash the whole episode. So we'll move on, but it's a good episode.
The actress is Lauren Sameel, and she's actually not in a bunch of stuff. She's kind of more of a character actor, kind of a larger IMDb of smaller roles, but hey, good for her. So you mentioned the Annie trying to be formidable in that whole scene about her talking about high school. And it's kind of interesting. I was thinking about, well, like what does this show look like? Because I was trying to think about that, like with a different set of writers, what does this show look like? And if this was on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, that would have definitely been like a cutaway. You know what I mean? Or like a flash, or like I was watching New Girl recently, and that would have been like a small cutaway that they would have done. And it's just kind of interesting how they never really do. Maybe Dan Harmon doesn't like cutaways or something like that, or because I know some writers don't, or some writers don't respect them. I know the South Park writers are famous for that, where anytime they go back in time, it's always a true scene. It's never a like, oh, just a little snippet here. And it's kind of, I was just kind of thinking about that as you were mentioning that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of good lines in here. And again, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but just kind of the structure of this episode is really strong. For leading the class, and I've already raved on him, but Abed, again, for me, again, of the 7, I feel like he is the most memorable, excuse me. If I'm thinking back to, you know, season 1, episode 7, and someone said Abed Batman, I would be like, oh, okay, that episode. You know what I mean? So for me, he's the winner here.
Oh yeah, I agree 100%. I don't really know what else there is to say. We've kind of raved on him a lot already, but he doesn't get a lot of screen time in this episode. I feel like he deserves a lot more because he does a great job, but like the little screen time that we get of Abed as Batman, it steals the show. Like, I don't know what else they could have done in this episode. Like if they wouldn't have done the Abed Batman, this episode would probably not be that memorable. But I think when people think of this episode, I agree. Like you mentioned this episode, you talk about Abed Batman, like, oh yeah, that's the episode, like the Halloween party. Like that's what people remember about this episode. That's what I remembered about this episode. It's such an iconic, I think, scene. And like, I think a lot of people like Abed as Batman, that's kind of like one of his like main, as a character, that's one of his main like memorable moments, I think, from the show. There's a lot of them for Abed, but like that's one of the main ones you see, just because like you see him dressed up as Batman and you know immediately like your mind goes to like him broodingly talking like Batman and, you know, saving Pierce and Jeff from the desk fort, which I love. But yeah, I agree. I think Abed steals the show in this one. He's the best of, I think, any character in this episode.
So for me, this episode isn't bad. I'd probably say like a 7 out of 10. But something I really do like about this episode, I will say, the structure of it, and we've talked about this so far, the structure of it is great because, again, it's all centered around this one event, these 2 events that are kind of coinciding, and all the characters that we meet and everything that's happening, even to the subplot of Shirley and Britta, all the little connections, little moments, all culminate into this little moment, and they both kind of interject when Jeff has to save Pierce out of his own fort or whatever, and he's walking with Slater, and he's like, "Okay, I gotta help," and it's a pretty cool moment too, and Pierce has that line in there where he goes, or sorry, Troy goes, "Jeff, you're the only one who can help," and he's like, "How am I the only one who can help?" That's what Pierce said. Get Jeff, he's the only one who can help. And it's a cool little moment there where it's like, okay, this is a true character moment. Is Jeff going to? And again, maybe rightfully so. I mean, Pierce took the pills. Pierce was trying to pretend he's a young guy, all these things. Is Jeff going to bail and maybe have an argument to bail, but has to have to live with that, or is he going to help his friend, and ultimately he does. And it's a pretty neat little moment there, how both of those little moments, both those little parties overlap and connect. It all involves the characters. It all builds pretty well. And so and you mentioned earlier how this feels like one of the first, or if not the first, real episode of the Community. And I think that's why, because the structure of it just so, I feel like the structure of it is so tight. And Dan Harmon's famous for the hero's journey circle. And this episode feels like a donut. It feels like a complete centered thing that leads somewhere, that's all interconnected. And so for that, I think this episode is great. For me, it just I don't remember laughing that much. It's just simple as that. I after rewatching this earlier this week, I was like, again, I appreciate what they're doing here, and I think the jokes are good in terms of like the writing, but I don't find myself laughing that much.
I mean, I've already kind of bragged on this episode a lot, so I don't know if I want to. I think it's a good episode. Like I said, I think it feels like one of the first real episodes that we get. I think you mentioned like the storyline. I think the storyline is great. I think the writing itself, just like the dialogue, is great. I think the acting is great. I think Chevy Chase has a lot of great scenes. I think Alison Brie does a great job. We see obviously great Danny Pudi as Abed. We mentioned Joel McHale, and I forgot the name of the actress who plays Slater. I apologize to her if she's listening to this, but I think they all have good, like Ken Jeong as Chang. Like I think everybody really nails the role in this episode. I think this is like the first time that I feel like that I can say that. I feel like every other episode before this has kind of had like one or two weak points in it, and this one I don't think there's a weak point in it for me. I think it's a really strong episode, some good lines, and we really, like you mentioned, like that scene with Jeff walking back with Slater, and you kind of have that moment where like, is he gonna stick with Slater or is he gonna go help Pierce? And honestly, rewatching this, like I knew it was gonna happen, but I still kind of was like wondering in that moment, like, is he gonna pick Pierce or is he gonna go with Slater? Like you kind of so like I think that's just a shout out to like Dane Harmon, the writers of the show. Like it's a great hero journey for Jeff, because by this point we know who Jeff is. We know that he's obviously very interested in like finding the most attractive woman he can. He's very interested in Slater. We've seen in this episode, and he does kind of have, earlier in this episode, we saw like he is not wanting to be associated with the study group because of the association, that it brings with him having friends. And to him, that probably looks like a weakness, but you kind of have that moment where you're not sure what's going to happen. So I just think it's great writing. I think you mentioned like the story structure too, the whole like Shirley and Britta like subplot too, I think is a kind of like way to show their relationship, because I think they have a good, probably underrated like chemistry through this, like in first season, because we know that Shirley kind of, I think, has an idea that like Britta's into Jeff, but like Britta's trying to pretend like she doesn't. There's just, there's a lot of really strong relationships that we see develop through this first season. And I think this episode really starts to tie it together, where these characters start to feel like a family, like a study group, and kind of has that community feel that we get for the rest of the show, where these characters aren't just like students that are around each other. Like they care about each other. They're friends. They are family because they love each other. I really feel like we start to get that in this episode. And I think that's another reason why I think it's a real community episode to me. I'd probably put it in probably my top 10. I mean, I had to sit down and make a list, but like, I'd probably give it a 9 out of 10.
And you mentioned something too, that like you've come back to this a lot during this rewatch, but how they've used the characters, and usually so far the first 6 episodes, one or two characters might have to get booted out because they don't know how to do it. But like even in this episode, again, Pierce has something to do. Shirley and Britta have something to do. Annie has something to do with it. Jeff, Abed, and even Troy, because Troy at the end is the one who tells Jeff, "Hey, come in here, help Pierce." On to the next one. On to the next one. Home economics. On to the next one. Episode 8, home economics. For extra credit, I didn't have anything for this one. I bet there were like a bunch of Easter eggs or whatever. I just didn't see any. Well, it's kind of funny. I was thinking about this a little bit this week, and because I was looking at other like community podcasts or rewatch podcasts, and some of them were like hour and a half, 2 hours. Like some of them were thick, and I bet they really go into like themes and depth and little stuff like that. And I think for us, I really want to create like a feeling that we are like students at Greendale, like watching things happen, kind of thing. And we know a little bit, got a little background, whatever. But like, yeah, it works. It works. I'm feeling what we're doing. So
I like it too. I like what we have going. No, I didn't really notice any little like Easter egg things, although I did do some research afterwards just to see if there was any trivia about this episode because I'm a trivia guy. The only thing I could find really that was interesting, which like makes sense now that I like after I watch it, like I knew this, but like going into it, but Danny Pudi is actually half Polish in real life, and he speaks Polish like to the neighbor that or his floor mate that comes in, like the guy that comes in, he's speaking Polish to him because Danny Pudi actually is half Polish. So interesting. I knew that he was half Polish watching the show, like rewatching it, but when I was watching that scene, it didn't hit me until afterwards that he's actually speaking Polish because he knows Polish because that's part of his ancestry. So kind of cool.
no, it sounded really fluent.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they'll like actors will do like a different language for a bit or whatever, and they'll be like, okay, like can get by, like you can get a little work, little vocal coach, and it'll sound decent. But yeah, I noticed that too. I was like, oh wow, that was really clean, and it sounded really natural to him. And
yeah, it didn't sound like he just used Duolingo or something to like learn Polish the day before.
I would say, and then that reminds me in the shows, and they use it as a joke, but all the Spanish just sounds terrible. Like at like the end of class, when they're like, "Esta noche,"
yeah. I think it's supposed to sound bad because we know that, or we later know that Chang is not actually teaching them Spanish. But yeah, I mean, it's as someone who took 3 years of like basic Spanish, even like it's just kind of bad to hear them try it. But that's Spanish classes for you, I guess.
Going on to A+, I have a bunch for this episode. But one of my first ones I noticed, and this just comes up in the first couple minutes of the episode. It's kind of sad to see Annie's reaction to Troy going on dates with Randy, or basically telling Annie that he's going to do that. And it's kind of one of those things where I just like felt bad for him, like felt a little relatable a little bit. Well, I just like, oh, I feel for you, Annie. Like I know
Yeah.
I'm sitting there like, I date Annie, smart, just works hard, just a go getter. I date her, but Troy doesn't see it, so gotta let it go.
So sad.
Yeah, and that's a shout out to Allison Brie and Donald Glover's acting too, because I mean, you just feel it when Troy is like, oh, I'm talking about Randy, and he's still like, like kind of like having to put on a smile, but not like just, oh, I'm like, oof, geez. So shout out to them. Pierce, he has this little line to Britta. He goes, let me talk to Vaughn. That way we won't be thinking about our chubby thighs or whether or not we can have babies. Oh,
Pierce has some good lines in this episode.
Yes. Another Pierce line. He says, back in the day, sex was like shaking hands before AIDS. And Alva goes, hence AIDS. I remember this was probably a couple months ago. I was watching just the best, like just a YouTube compilation, best lines of Community. And that was in there. And I was like, oh, I forgot this one. I'm like, let's go.
It's kind of out of character for Abed. It doesn't really feel like something he would say. I think it's the fact that he's the one that says it. It hits more. Like if Jeff would say that, it would be funny, but like, the fact that Abed is saying this when he's not really the kind of person that usually says stuff like that, I think makes it that much better.
Mm-hmm. A few more lines here. Jeff saying to the study group, the next person that offers me charity or pity will be mentioned by name in my suicide note. When Jeff is living with Abed, he said, I spent a quarter in 2 days. And that just reminded me of college so much. Like I always tell this story. I was telling the story recently to a group of people, but I remember one time, I think it was before a weekend that I was going to hang out with some guy friends or whatever. And I remember like, I don't know how much money I have in my account. And so I like log on to my little bank account, just see how much money I have in my checking account. And it was like $55. And it just reminds me of that scene in Thor Ragnarok when like Thor sees Hulk again for the first time, when they're like introducing him to that battle arena, and he's like, yes. Like that's how I felt, like double digits in my account. Let's go. That just reminded me of college so much. And then another just great Pierce line and a knockout episode for Pierce when he says to Vaughn, maybe I'm not a small nippled credit hogging jag who only knows 3 power chords. Oh my goodness. As a like minor guitar player as myself, that just got me so got me so good. Because honestly, and this is kind of common knowledge, but like so many pop songs are just like 4 chords, just rearranged. And so just to hear him say that, it was just that got me going.
I feel like we don't give Pierce enough credit for his musical talent because this is not the first time that we see him. Like he actually has like a lot of musical ability, and like he obviously wrote the jingle for Hawthorne Wipes, so he obviously must have some, but he knows what he's doing. And it's kind of like, I almost wonder if Chevy Chase has some kind of musical background. I don't know for sure, but it kind of makes you wonder if that's why they write that into Pierce's character. Maybe, I'm not sure. I need to look that up. No, there's a lot of good Pierce lines in this one though. Yeah, you mentioned a lot of the good ones though, but some other great ones from this episode. I think my favorite line from this whole episode is it's actually a Vaughn line, which is surprising. When he's talking to Britta, he calls her the exact opposite of an antioxidant. And I don't know why, but I think that's really funny because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But when Vaughn says it, you kind of understand where he's coming from. And then, another great moment is Annie rolling the dice in the cafeteria just because, it just, and it's funny. You got to watch it to understand the humor, but it's, I don't know. It's kind of, maybe it's the immaturity in me, but I think that it's kind of funny. There's a really good, not so much funny line, but it's a kind of a like hit you in the feels kind of line is when Jeff and Abed are watching TV and Jeff says like TV's the best dad there is. It doesn't like get mad at you. It doesn't like yell at you and stuff. And like, it hurts because we're starting to like get more of a glimpse into Jeff's like upbringing and his daddy issues. But I don't know. There's just something about that line. Like TV's the best dad there is. It kind of hits you like, man, that for some people that's true. And that's sad. But I think about my own life, even like I have a great relationship with my dad, but at the same time, like TV, yeah, it's kind of like, it's always there. It's comforting when you think about it. Think about all the shows that have, just been there for you, The Office, Community, obviously, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, like shows for me that were there, I could always turn to those when I needed them. And I think that line for anybody who's ever had a connection with the TV show that really, they just felt such a deep connection with, I think that line resonates with a lot of people. And then one final shout out to Patton Oswalt as the nurse in this episode, because I think he's an underrated comedian. And like watching this, I don't know, it kind of feels like he's like a big cameo for such a small part. Mm-hmm. Because like it wasn't like he was unknown at this time. Like he'd been in like, he was in King of Queens. Like he'd already had like a career as a comedian at this point. So like for him to be in this episode, it kind of feels strange to see him because he has such a small part. And like, I know like Community was, it was on like NBC, like it was kind of a big show, but it wasn't super popular. So for them to like have him this early on in like the show, like it hadn't really probably gotten that big yet at this point. It's kind of odd to see, but I think it's just, I don't know. He has a brain of comedy that I think it's funny the way he delivers his lines. Him giving Troy the condoms and like, him then hitting on Annie, like as he's trying to like treat her. It's such a, like a change of like almost like a 180 from like, yeah, here's this nurse that like is trying to help Annie out. It's like, oh, this guy carries condoms and just gives them to people. And then he's hitting on his patients. Like, only Greendale would have Patton Oswalt as like the school nurse.
It feels like a personal favor to Dan Harmon, but I don't know if they have a connection or because when I looked on Dan Harmon's IMDb, I don't think there's a working connection, but there might be in something or whatever. But like just to kind of like what you said, like it feels like a bigger cameo just because he's only in that one scene. He's only there for like a minute and a half, so it was kind of interesting. But yeah, it's cool to see him, and yeah, his acting is really strong. Where it's just like he plays like this flat, kind of creepy, like campus nurse, and it works. I know we have to get into it, but because I know we both love the song. But getting rid of Britta, I'm getting rid of the bee.
She's a no good bee.
Something I noticed, this goes back to episode 4 of this season, but the title of the band is Some Worries. And Vaughn I believe it's at the end of episode 4, but Vaughn and his friends are about to play hacky sack, and Vaughn doesn't catch it. And he's like, sorry, guys. And the coffee guy, the stoner coffee guy was like,
Zeke.
oh, no worries, man. No worries, man. And he's like, hey, some worries. And when they get on stage, he's like, yeah, we're Some Worries. We got this new song called Getting Rid of Britta. And I was like, oh, it's Some Worries. Like,
there's an Easter egg. See, there you go. There's an Easter egg. I didn't catch that. I didn't think about that, but that makes more sense. I was wondering, yeah, that makes more sense.
Also, Getting Rid of Britta can be found on Spotify in its whole 2 minutes of glory. I was listening to it, just like a snippet of it earlier, but it just works, that like laid back, kind of like soft reggae, ska kind of vibe.
Yeah, it actually is kind of a fire song. Like, yeah, and then also like Pierce Ruby is also kind of catchy, and like they're similar themes, but like different style of music. Both of those songs, man. After watching this episode again, I've had this going through my head like all day.
Leading the class, I have Pierce for this one. There's not a lot of episodes where Pierce, I feel like, really stands out. But the thing I love about Pierce in this episode is that he's absolutely true to his character in the sense of he says inappropriate stuff, he gets involved where he's completely incapable, so on and so forth. He's untrustworthy, but he's also hilarious. And we've talked about it a little bit already, where they give him a really good, they write for him a bunch of really good lines in this episode. And yeah, I just feel like he really stands out. And again, he's in the whole thing. He's involved with the whole Vaughn situation, and obviously that is one of the key backbones of this episode. And yeah, I hats off to Pierce on this one.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's we already mentioned it. He's got some really great lines. I think he is probably one of the main, like, he carries this episode, I'd say. One of the guys that carries it anyway. I'm gonna go with Britta. I feel like for this one though, for me, just because these last couple episodes, we've really seen her kind of be almost like the mom of the group, even though like Shirley's like the actual mom in the group. Britta cares a lot about her friends. I don't think she probably would, like, we're still kind of seeing her become herself and like have some character growth. But like, I think part of that is like, she really cares about her friends because she's found her group of people who they like her for who she is. They don't care. I mean, they give her crap about stuff. Like, they like her for who she is. She can be herself for the most part. And like, she is in her, like, she's found her people and she cares about them a lot. And I just think the acting by Gillian Jacobs is superb in this episode. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what else to say, but I think Britta is just kind of like, man, I really appreciate, what she's doing in terms of a character sense, like the wholesomeness of her character, where she's kind of almost like the glue holding this group together because they've all got their issues and she's got her own issues, but she's trying to help people, and trying to help her friends out, which I think is probably a good reason why she tries to become like a psychologist later on in the show.
I want to say, like you just said, it is kind of foreshadowing in the sense of that, like, oh, she at least believes that she's going to help people and like at least somewhat cares about it. And oftentimes, as we see later in the series, is like it's not necessarily wanted or warranted or sometimes just flat out wrong, but it's there, But yeah, I feel that these past 2 episodes, like you said, like, she's kind of really shown her caring side and had to a little bit, like you said, kind of be the mom to the group. And yeah, like, and in that space, like, she's pretty admirable, and it's also good too for character's sake, because and it's been a running kind of it's been a running storyline throughout the season, but like her and Jeff and this on again off again thing, like, we kind of break away from that for a little bit, which is really nice, and really spend time doing something that involves the rest of the cast and seeing kind of her involvement in that just kind of be something else outside of that, which is
she kind of breaks out of just being like that one joke that she's the girl that Jeff's trying to like bag. I like that she finally gets some like further growth past that, just that storyline, as they really, I think the writing starts to like figure out what they want to do with her and do with Jeff. I think this is a great part of the series, probably like Britta's like strongest part of the whole show, which we've talked about this before. Like, I think Britta is such an underrated character, and I hate where they go with her, because she kind of becomes like the butt of the joke again later. But for this part of season 1, like she's maybe like my favorite character of the show at this point, just for, like we mentioned, yeah, she just really shows that caringness, that kind of carrying the group, so to speak, like carrying the burden of the group. Because even Jeff, like we haven't really seen him. Obviously, we see him in the last episode with Pierce, but like Jeff isn't really like to the point of the show yet, where he's like the dad of the group, like always solving the problems. We're not really at that, because he's obviously got his own problems here in this episode, and Britta's trying to help him with that. So like, and to that extent, like Jeff is like pretty much the leader of the group, but I think Britta is kind of leading Jeff. So by like, therefore she's kind of like leading the group at this point. I don't know. It's just, it's interesting. Again, looking at the arc of Britta as a character and just how she fits into the show. This is a really interesting time for her, but I think she's the strongest character for me in this episode.
So for me, this episode is probably my favorite of the season so far, and a favorite of this rewatch, I'd say. I feel like this episode, I think I found myself laughing a bunch this episode. I found myself feeling a bunch this episode. We kind of talked about that. One weird spot, which honestly, this feels like a re-edit, or like, oh, they wanted to do this, but then they had to cut it because NBC didn't like it. The opening with Chang, and how Chang wakes up Jeff, where they're trying to like throw like little piece of paper into Jeff's mouth in the beginning, and then Chang's like, oh, let me get him, and like just yells in his face like "Buenos dias, Winger," and it just felt like really, that was kind of it. Like it just felt, and an interesting thing too, because they show Troy and Shirley's face, and it feels like they're like mortified, or like almost afraid of like what's about to happen, like what Chang's gonna do, and then Chang just kind of wakes them up by yelling in his face something like not mean or whatever. And I keep on thinking like, oh, because I didn't remember the scene, so I was like, oh, is Chang just gonna like go ballistic and go crazy and like freak everybody out, and then be like, okay, hasta mañana, like, you know what I mean? But he's just like, Buenos dias, Winger, and that's kind of it. And so that was, I don't know, that was like a dark spot for me in this episode, but overall, my favorite episode this season.
You know, I'm kind of the opposite. I'm not a huge fan of this episode. I don't know. It's not the weakest of this season. There's been some worse ones, but I don't know. I think after the last episode, the one before this was really strong for me, and this one just kind of, I think, is a little weaker. I mean, a good storyline. There's good jokes, but I don't know. I didn't feel like I laughed a whole lot at it. I think like the main thing from this episode that I really remember is the Britta, getting rid of Britta, like the song. That's really all that I feel like I remember from this episode. And everything else kind of just, I think, falls flat. The Troy and Annie, like the whole plot with them, I honestly forgot about that storyline rewatching this, because I kind of thought that we were past like the Annie and Troy thing. I guess I forgot how long that lasted over the course of this season. I mean, there is some feel moments there where you really feel for Annie, and like obviously, you just kind of feel bad for her because she's really trying her hardest. But I don't know. It's just this episode, there's really like nothing did wrong. I just don't feel like that drawn to it as like, this is an episode that I love. Nothing really super crazy happens. So I don't know. It just kind of feels like a meh episode, probably like a 6 or 7 out of 10. And there's a few things that I guess that a couple of nitpicks I would say for this episode. Like the main one for me was, we've talked about this before, toilet humor works some shows. In Community, I don't really enjoy it because I don't think it needs it to be a good show.
Agreed.
Like when it goes down to that level, it feels like they're really stooping low. They're really dropping down a level from like what they could be and what they usually are. And like the rap part, I'm talking about like the Pierce is a B song, when the guy comes out and starts rapping about Pierce, and is like, it feels so immature. Like we're supposed to laugh at this guy like making fun of Pierce and like using like toilet humor. It just doesn't fit the rest of the vibe of the show for me. So it kind of, I don't know. I don't want to say it ruined the episode, but it definitely just kind of made me like, really, like, okay, whatever. And then like another thing, I don't know. We kind of mentioned earlier, like the whole Britta finally moving beyond like the whole just one joke of her just being the girl that Jeff wants to like sleep with. And we got him and Slater in the last episode. And then in this episode, he makes a comment again about sleeping with Britta, because they're talking on the bench, and he says something about like, he says something about her coming over or whatever, and then she talks about his car getting towed. But like, really, like you're you're going after like Slater, and obviously like maybe they're not dating at this point, but like I thought we were past that, you know? I thought that we were kind of over that joke, and I don't know. There were some lines in this where it kind of felt lazy. It kind of felt like we were going back into like the first 5 episodes of the, or first 6 episodes of the season were like, they were okay, but kind of weak writing. The show was still trying to find itself. And then we had like the intro to stats episode with the Halloween party, which was really good. And then this one kind of just falls back into it. So I don't know. I mean, not every episode can be a home run, but I don't know. I expected more out of this one. Again, the song is great. The song is awesome, but the rest of the episode is average for me.
I hear you. And something you mentioned in there, and it kind of got me thinking, it almost feels like this, like the first 6 episodes of this season almost feel like because you know how like a lot of shows, their first seasons being like 6 to 10 seasons, something like that sometimes, just because like you never know what's going to happen, and that's how much the network's just letting them kind of run. And it kind of feels like the first 6 episodes of this show feel like one season. And because we kind of, and again, it really shows with that, like Jeff and Britta on again, off again, like, oh, are they going to sleep together kind of storyline, where again, like it feels like, okay, we can not joke about that this week. We can be past that this week. We can move past it. So yeah, that's a good point there. I agree with you. The toilet humor, I hate toilet humor in general, and yeah, in this show, it feels so unnecessary. And like I get it, like you said in the rap portion where it's like, you know, I get it where it's kind of like it's kind of offbeat in the sense of, oh, he's not actually rapping and making points. He just he's kind of doing this goofy thing. And I see it, but yeah, I don't really like it. And you kind of mentioned with the Troy and anything, and maybe because like we're older and we're kind of past this point of like the awkward, cutesy, like, oh, I like you, but I'm not gonna say it. And it's just like it does at a certain point, especially in this episode. I'm like, okay, girl, just say it. And if he says no, and I get like, and Shirley tells Annie that, where she's like, hey, you should say it. And Annie's like, oh well, I could lose a friend too. And it's like, okay, yes, but you guys really aren't that close of friends. Like, it's not like it's, this is the first episode. We're still like 8-9 weeks into this whole thing. If it's Halloween time, right? Into the school year, he barely knows your name still. Like, I see it, but I just, it does, again, being a bit older, being kind of past that time where it's like, oh, I like you, I'm not going to say it, and I'll kind of help you and be around. And like, it does get a little like, just tell him you like him, or tell him you like him, and if it happens, it happens. Yeah, I mean, and stuff like that. So I feel that.